Yeah, because it's et hostes ornamenta adunt. So, and foes bear arms ad januam necem, to the doors of death. Yeah, so that's literally just English syntax. That's not how it would actually be written in Latin.
Well, maybe because we're in America now.
No. No. You know why? Because if Latin had changed and developed, you know what would have happened? Italian, Phoebe. Hey everyone. Welcome to Monster Donut, a literary and historical deep dive into the Percy Jackson series and all of its following spin-offs. I'm Emily, a classic scholar and general mythology fan and resident Aeneid hater.
And I'm Phoebe, a dramaturg and story consultant. And today we have a special guest here to finally start talking about Heroes of Olympus.
Woo!
We have Charlie from Of the Eldest Gods. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, friends. I'm here. I'm queer. I'm ready to talk about Lost Hero, the book that I feel like no one likes.
But you like it, or so you said, so you claimed.
I like first books in a series, personally. They bring you back to the magic, you know? Bring you back to that good feeling. The last book always makes me, like, sad and bittersweet feeling, but the first book gives me those good vibes again.
Before we start talking about the book properly, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what Of the Eldest Gods is?
So, I have my own Percy Jackson podcast called Of the Eldest Gods. I do it with my friend Ray. We're currently on Battle of the Labyrinth. We've had Emily on for an episode.
It was a lot of fun.
But we go chapter by chapter, and I just, like, give little, like, hey, this is the context of, like, the myth that's going on right now. Because there's a lot going on. Like, Rick puts a lot of fucking mythology in his books. And it's like, there was still more in Heroes of Olympus. He just kept finding more things that he didn't put in the other ones. And then in Trials of Apollo, it's just like, he's really found, like, some obscure stuff.
I'm excited for Trials of Apollo.
I'm so excited for Trials of Apollo. I want to skip the series and go straight to Trials of Apollo.
Y'all will get there so much faster than me, so...
I have to say, like, my fun story with The Lost Hero is that I read through The Last Olympian, I think when I was in middle school or whenever the books were out. And then my freshman year of college, Phoebe started posting a lot because I think Blood of Olympus was it was House of Hades was about to come out. And Phoebe was posting about it a lot on Tumblr. And Phoebe has a superpower where if she'll like casually mention a piece of media and your brain will immediately be like, I gotta read it. I gotta check it out. And it was like in my first month of college, I keep seeing Phoebe posting stuff, and I was like, you know what? I want to go back. Percy Jackson was really fun to read. Let me read these new books. And so I read The Lost Hero and Son of Neptune within like probably 48 hours. And then I think I got halfway through Mark of Athena and stopped. And then I didn't pick these books up again until after I'd graduated because, again, I was talking to Phoebe and she was like, you didn't finish the series.
Right. My charm speak wore off while you were in college. That's the thing. I totally forgot my copy of this was signed and got jump scared by Rick's scribble when I opened it.
Wait, when did you get it signed?
I didn't. They used to just, like, stock a bunch in Barnes & Noble. Like, if you pre-ordered it, your copy would be signed. I don't know if they still do that. But here it is. It very clearly says Rick Riordan.
I love his scribbles.
For those listening at home, it's literally like a loop-de-loop.
Yeah, I have a similar one on my copy of The Lightning Thief.
But I opened my book and I was like, what happened here? And then I was like, oh, right. It's a signature.
Wait, that's not what mine looks like, though. Hold on. Let me get my copy of Titan's Guard.
Well, didn't you get that signed in, like, 2007?
Yeah.
So before he got sick of us.
I got it signed after I asked him my annoying questions.
Oh, right. He should have just scribbled on that.
I had a gold pen and a silver pen. So, oh my god, I have Backbiter signed Titan's Guard.
We'll post pictures of these. And also, I figured I would say this up here just because I'm sure people skip the outro of our episodes and won't hear this. We recently made a Ko-fi, however you say it, because we don't make any money off of doing this. So if you'd like to support us, that is officially our tip jar. So if you like the podcast, think about leaving us a tip.
It's only if you feel so moved. It would be very appreciated. And also, if you want to help us out in a non-monetary way, it's always awesome to see reviews on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you're listening to your podcasts, comments or anything. So, yeah, it'd be super fun. No, that's a bad way to end that. Super fun.
It'd be
you leaving
super
a comment?
fun.
It'd be super fun.
If you would rate us 5 stars on Spotify. You can find the link to our Ko-fi and to Apple Podcasts and all that in our link tree on all of our social media, which is at PJOPod.
Wherever your podcasts are sold.
Yeah. If you're buying them, I don't know what you're doing. Something's wrong. So we start off on the bus to the Grand Canyon. A throwback to the beginning of The Lightning Thief.
Yeah, we're on a bus again.
On a school trip.
Mm-hmm. And here we meet our 3 main characters immediately. And so just for old time's sake, even though this means nothing, I thought I'd say what everyone's first line was.
Oh, yeah!
But they're, like, kind of nonsense.
Wait, what are they?
Well, Jason's first spoken line of dialogue is, I don't, and then it gets cut off. Which is, like, so true. He doesn't.
Yeah.
And Piper's is, Jason, you okay? I do think it is an important thing about her that we do first learn, like we first paint her as like someone who's perceptive and kind before we learn that this school is like basically the camp from Holes and that she's there for being a thief. But it's like you get that from Piper, and then immediately that's like the very first thing that we get from Leo is that he's at the school from Holes. Because his first line is, yeah, right, Jason. We've all been framed. I didn't run away 6 times. Piper didn't steal a BMW.
Should we talk about the switch to third person?
Oh, I think with third person, I mean, I mentioned already in one of our episodes, when we're in third person, the characters can't hide anything from the narrator. The narrator will just tell you anything and everything, which in first person they can decide whether or not to tell you what they're thinking, basically. But I mean, like, with Piper, the narrator is not going to tell you what her secret is for like 10 chapters. It's just going to be like, oh, she thought about the dream she had, and then like not explain it. So it's almost as if it's in first person, but the third person does have an effect of like distancing you from the characters, which I think kind of works with Jason, because like in this opening chapter and like the couple chapters surrounding it, we get such like clear personalities from Piper and Leo. You know, we get kind of, like I said, that gentler side from Piper, but then also she's the one who's going around starting physical fights with people on the field trip. And like Leo, we immediately know, like, troublemaker, messing with the teacher, cracking jokes, not taking anything too seriously. And then it leaves you with this huge like gap coming from Jason, and it's like especially apparent because you're in third person and aren't in his head. You're just like, there's this empty hole in the narrator position at the very beginning of the book.
It's interesting because he doesn't know who he is or what he's done, and like how much of that is so entrenched in his personality that like it's hard to get a read on him for a while until he starts to remember like little things and start to like understand his identity a little bit more. He's also just a reserved person, which I don't think any of us as a reader are used to.
I want to say something that is a spoiler for the Adventure Zone.
Can you say it in a way that I would know what you're talking about?
I'm talking about when so much of your personality is the thing that you do that, like, to erase your memory, you would have to, like, get rid of the whole thing.
Yeah. Got it. Okay.
But that's kind of what I get from Jason, is just because, like,
yeah,
we learn that so much of him is, you know, being raised from, like, age 2 in the Wolf House.
Yeah.
It's like that is who he is like the stuff that was taken from him.
And it'll be interesting to compare that to Mr. Jackson in the next book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we get the first like breadcrumbed clue about Jason's identity, which I always thought was interesting. Which is that he has this golden coin with a description of a Roman bust. And on the back it says Julius, which is interesting to me because that's Julius. Who do we know any famous Juliuses? Just anything? Does that ring a bell? Anyone?
Julius Cain from the Cain Chronicles.
But I was wondering if that coin was actually maybe a relic. Because at first I was like, does that just mean that it's got the coin is like Julius Caesar on it? Which honestly is probably what Rick intended. But I have a way more fun headcanon, which is that Jason and Thalia are Italian. And they're secretly descended from the Julii clan, which is one of the old Roman families. A patrician. So it'd be a kind of fun headcanon for me, which I think is supported by this text here, that Jason's Italian. But that like maybe this is like a fun little family Julius Caesar or Julii clan family relic that he's picked up. Because then that's also kind of fun is it's a coin and he flips it and it turns into a golden sword. And then we find out later, if you flip it on the other way, it turns into a spear, which is really fun because that would be the two primary weapons of the Roman legionary soldier. I was trying to remember reading this. If the first time I read this, I like figured how much I'd figured out by the time we get like the reveal. I do remember like a big driving like mystery while I was reading it the first time being really engaging. Like I remember flying through this book because I was like, who is this guy? What's going on?
I think it's especially because, like, the moments where we get a piece of Jason's personality revealed, when he's, like, acting on autopilot or, like, goes into commander mode.
Yeah.
They're, like, so exciting because the Jason that, like, clearly lives somewhere inside him feels, like, massive. Like, the things that he can do and the authority that he acts with and speaks with sometimes and, like, the confidence. He's, like, so intense in moments.
Yeah.
And you're, like...
Who are you?
He just seems so huge. Like, he looms so large in those moments. And then when he goes back to, like, oh, I don't remember anything, it's like, no, hang on a second. You can't just go back to, like...
He is blonde Superman, though. Like, he can fly. He's got the two personalities going. He's got the amnesiac, but, like, the reserved guy. And then he's got the, I'm the hero, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah. I think I mentioned in a prior episode one of my favorite tropes is like characters who have reached god tier levels of skill, but then they meet like normal people who haven't like done all of that and been through all of that, and they're like, wait, you can what? Wait, you did what? And I feel like this book is really fun because like we, the audience, get to experience that with Jason a little bit. Like, him at the end where he's just like, oh, yeah, I battled the Titan Krios. I did all of this stuff. And he's, like, listing all these
iconic speeds.
It's so good. And I'm, like, I remember when I was first reading that, I was living. I was like, OMG.
I want his side of the Titan War. I think that would be so important.
When he says, what does he say? I destroyed the Titan Krios with my bare hands. I was like, your bare hands?
I want to know.
Here's the thing, like, when I was reading this book originally, I was like, oh, man, he's just as badass as Percy. But then rereading The Last Olympian, Percy, like, barely fights Kronos. Like, barely. That's not even a fight scene. And so the fact that, like, Jason is there bare-knuckle boxing and fighting on the other side.
But it's also, like, there's such an emphasis on the weapons throughout that book, like, throughout The Last Olympian, that it's, like, the idea that you could defeat a Titan with your bare hands.
I'm imagining Jason when, like, Thor, God of Thunder, like, shit on him.
You know, that makes so much more sense than what was in my head, which was just him, like, choking him out.
Why not both, you know? But, yeah, I did think it was really fun that we kicked it off as well with the little mythological reference, because they're like, oh, the guy with one shoe!
Yeah!
So in the Jason myth, he ends up being, like, the chosen of Hera, because she, like, appears to him and needs, as an old woman, and wanting to cross a rushing river. And he is really nice. So he carries her on his back, and she, like, keeps testing him, so she becomes heavier and heavier as he carries her, but he makes it to the other side, but he loses a shoe.
Yeah, she blesses him after he's went across. It's like, basically, I guess, a prophecy or something that whoever had one shoe was, like, supposed to be the king, and that's why Peleus sends him on the quest for the Golden Fleece. Like, no, you actually have to go do this other thing.
Yeah, no.
You
he
like
helps
quests?
her.
Go do that.
Is it that he helps her across, and then he continues on his journey, and he shows up, and they're like, "Oh my god, he's got one shoe."
Yeah, it's like, shit. This is the guy. No, you gotta go on this quest first, actually, and then you can become king. And that's what fucks him over.
And that way we kick off our parallels, though, because he's unknowingly been chosen by Hera and tested by her at this point, and he's got one shoe, and then he kind of gets tapped to go on this grand adventure. Because we've talked a little bit about how a lot of these books, they all kind of are modeled after famous myths, and this one is modeled after Jason and the Argonauts, and it kind of follows a lot of the same beats. So it's kind of fun that we start off the Lightning Thief with the Perseus myth replayed, and now we're starting off the Lost Hero with the Jason myth replayed by Jason.
Yeah. It's a return to where we were, because we talked about how we were distancing ourselves from replaying myths over the course of the Percy Jackson series, and it's like to the point where when we did start actually replaying moments in The Last Olympian, it was kind of jarring. I don't know, it was almost like coming back to the basics with this story, because it was such a replay in some moments.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements in this story too that are kind of spread out amongst like Piper, Jason, and Leo that are very reminiscent also of the Lightning Thief. If we want to zoom a little ahead, because first of all, we've got like a stolen, an almost killed, but actually they were stolen parental, I'm putting that in heavy air quotes, figure of Coach Hedge. So that kind of is one of them.
That's not who I was expecting.
I thought you were going to say Hera.
Air quotes.
I thought you were going to say Piper's dad, and then you put it in air quotes, and I was like, wait, who are we talking about now?
Well, no, I'm more specifically talking about, like, the Minotaur scene specifically. Like, that, the first, like, one of the big major monster encounter is stolen. It's fine. The choice between a parental figure and saving the world, that's also in there. But we've also got Jason, as it turns out, a child of the big three, being a bad omen and a danger to the rest of camp, because they keep talking about Jason being a danger, being instrumental in like a greater prophecy that's teased, but we never actually like fully, well, we do hear it, but there's like an extra prophecy that they keep mentioning. They keep saying like Leo is instrumental in this other thing.
Yeah.
So Leo's kind of like the prophecy kid in that way, and they keep talking about him like that.
Yeah, he's definitely the one that they emphasize has like a greater destiny. Yeah. Like something after this. They're the hero of something. That's true.
Another thing that I thought was kind of interesting was not a lot of time has passed since the Great War. So there's a lot of like still like grief and ghosts hanging around. And I also thought it was really interesting that Piper is super paralleled with Selena. And the seeds are kind of sown for her to basically be picking up where Selena left off. And in that way, Leo is the same with Beckendorf, where he's kind of like stepping into this mantle with Festus the dragon, who Beckendorf like discovered and only he could like control. So there's all of these kind of continuations of this work and ghost. So it feels like we're picking up where we left off also, instead of starting a new story. Although I also wrote down no justice for Lee Fletcher, unfortunately.
Interesting, because I didn't think of it as picking up where we left off. I felt like it was starting a new story, but where like you could feel the empty holes and like, because there aren't many things about Leo that remind me of Beckendorf. And there aren't many things about Piper that remind me of Selena. It's just like people keep comparing them, and it's the same thing of like the whole camp scene. There's this treatment of the past, like the last series, as like not quite legend yet, but like it's still a story that now has to be told. And so we get to see the past starting to become legend slowly through our main characters now having to look at it as an outsider. And so to me, those were kind of just the holes that are now living among them.
Yeah, I mean, there's that really good scene that's like in between all the Aphrodite kids when Piper's there, where they're telling her about Selena. And a lot of the kids are like, she was a hero. Meanwhile, Drew is like, well, she was a traitor. And in Piper's brain, she's like, I'm going to be a traitor. Oh, no.
Right? And she keeps thinking about it like, oh, no, I'm going to be the next Selena Beauregard, however you're supposed to say it.
I mean, if you want to do like French, it's Beauregard, but...
I'm going to say Beauregard to disrespect the French.
But it's the language of love.
But yeah, you're already seeing the stories starting to kind of morph because other people are starting to tell them.
This is why I also started thinking about, as much as I hate it, the Aeneid.
Oh no.
Because in that way as well, you know, we look at like all of the great epics in the list, and what sets the Aeneid apart from a lot of the quote unquote like great old epics and like at least the Western canon. So like your Iliad and the Odyssey, Beowulf, Epic of Gilgamesh, which is not strictly Western, but it's kind of part of our canon. The Aeneid is by far the most recent and also actively builds off the legacy of another one. And it also like kind of takes a lot of the Iliad and the Odyssey and takes and retells it from a different perspective, but like also replays it. It does what The Force Awakens does, if you will. No, honestly, The Force Awakens is better than the Aeneid.
Was gonna say.
But it's interesting to me because I was trying to do a little bit of research to remind myself of a really early history of Rome. And something that kept hitting me over and over and over again was that almost everybody who writes about the history of Rome as a city begins with the story of Aeneas or Romulus and Remus. Even the like really scholarly historical texts, it's really hard. You like have to go out of your way to really look up the actual like archaeological, anthropological, linguistic history of how Rome came about. Like in so many ways, most civilizations do have like founding mythology, but I feel like most of them we still like know enough, or we know enough to not know like where they came from. And yet with Rome, every time there's just this irresistible pull to always begin with its own myths about itself, which I think also ties a little bit into how we as Americans think about Greece and Rome. So we're at camp.
We're at camp. We've decided we're at camp now. We never said that we were transitioning to camp.
Yeah, we're at camp.
We are at camp.
We spend like the first half of this book at camp, and it's one day.
But it's 3 different perspectives. Like you gotta get Piper's whole day, Leo's whole day, Jason's whole day.
And we also start to get a bit more breadcrumbing of Jason and like what might have come from like what's going on, what's his deal basically. And it seems like Chiron knows. And he's like, oh, can't say. I swore an oath on the river Styx. And there's also like a couple weird moments where Jason says things to Annabeth, and they're definitely things Annabeth should know. And yet she somehow has no idea. The first is that he shows his tattoo with 12 lines and SBQR. And Annabeth's like, wow, I've never seen marks like this.
You know Annabeth knows this shit.
But then there's another moment where someone brings up lupa. And Annabeth's like, weird, never heard of it. And like lupa is just the feminine form of the word wolf in Latin, which she should know. And like she would theoretically be like, Latin wolf, huh, she-wolf. Huh, does this remind me of any stories or myths?
Maybe Chiron wants to keep these guys so separate that he's censoring all of the books that come into camp.
I would believe that, actually.
Like, that's what I'm thinking, though. Like, I wonder if there's something weirder going on where, like, they're really, like, it's just, like, Control-Alt-Delete every once in a while.
Oh, like she can't retain information about Rome.
Yeah.
Like, Chiron uses the mist over them, like, every time they learn something that's Roman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, because he knows, and he swore an oath, so maybe part of the oath is having to...
Well, they say a couple times in the book that, like, they're using the mist, trying to manipulate them so that they won't run into each other. Like, this lines up. This makes sense.
Okay.
Do we want to talk about Jason in the Hypnos cabin? I just wanted to talk about Clovis and how I love him, actually. I just love this sleepy little boy and this cabin where, like, it makes you want to fall asleep, and it's so dangerous because it makes you want to fall asleep.
I love that they just straight up have water from the Lethe in their cabin too. Like,
yeah, the Stoll brothers are not allowed in this cabin.
Clovis said something interesting in this scene that I'm trying to find in my notes.
Oh yeah, like how the gods are only Roman and stuff. So we call the gods by their Greek names because that's their original form, but saying their Roman aspects are exactly the same, that's not true. In Rome, they became more warlike. They didn't mingle with mortals as much. They were harsher, more powerful, the gods of an empire.
I don't know who wants to speak on this first.
I feel like you should talk about it first with, like, story stuff because... Well, I mean, Phoebe knows what I'm gonna talk about.
I think I know what you're gonna talk about.
So what I noted about this scene, or specifically about these lines where Clovis, when Annabeth says, "Oh, the darker side of the gods," is like not necessarily the darker side, but the version that values discipline and strength and honor above most things. Because I now know Jason, it just showed me how much Jason is Rome, and like just how Roman Jason is at the beginning of this series. And that those are traits that, like, when Jason goes into his kind of former form for a moment, those are the things that kind of come through. I'm thinking of, there's a specific moment that I can't remember exactly what it is.
Is it when he's fighting Lit, where he like remembers all of his combat training all of a sudden?
Maybe it's like moments like that, and his speech at the end that is so like harsh and powerful, like Rome is described here. And like there's a specific moment, it's something like is bothering him about like his values. It's like honor or discipline or something that comes up in one of these scenes, and I can't remember which it is, so I'm just gonna forget about it and keep going. But these are like some of the most intense aspects that we get of Jason's personality when his like former personality breaks through.
I'm just now thinking how Jason is basically like that anime character trope. Would it be a superpowered evil side? Something like that, where just like he just like, oh, I'm a different person now, does the really cool shit, and then goes back to being like normal ass dude.
I mean, that's kind of what it feels like, where he's just like, whoa, that was weird.
Right? He goes into autopilot, and his autopilot is like deadly. But yeah, you can say what you're gonna say about this scene now.
Charlie, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I thought y'all were going to talk about, complain about, like, how, oh, the Romans didn't really copy those gods from the Greeks.
Yeah, that's, yeah. There's more to it than that. I'm not even going to dwell too much on that, because I'm going to be honest. I expected to get really angry at the way Rick describes the Roman and Greek relationship, because there is a really gigantic misconception that I think most people have, that I had for a while, actually, because there's so many gods that line up, they just have different names, that they also just adopted the Greek gods because they're so similar. But the actual reality is that the Greeks and the Romans are both descended from the Indo-European culture. So they're not copied gods. They're the same gods. They're just expressed in different ways from the different peoples. And those two, they happen to be pretty similar. But that same tradition also has birthed the Norse gods, the German gods, the Celtic gods. So, for example, Zeus, the name in Greek, there's an interesting etymological shift, but Jupiter, his name derives from Diu Pater. Pater is the word for father. Diu is sky, so Diu Pater, like father sky. And there's cognates as well in like Sanskrit all the way through, and like a bunch of others. Odin and Wotan and like the German and Norse traditions, they're the same dude. Like it's the same god. This whole concept is flawed. But here's the thing, gods having different aspects and even different names is a thing in Greek and Roman mythology. And in fact, Rick even references an example of it in this book, where most Greek temples and Roman temples are consecrated not just to Zeus, but to specifically like the temple to Zeus in Athens is specifically the temple to Olympian Zeus. And he mentions like the temple to Juno Moneta, like Juno the Warner. There's a whole bunch of different aspects to each god that have different temples consecrated to them. So like almost every temple you go to and look up is consecrated to a different aspect of a different god, and they're depicted differently depending on, in the art, depending on which version you're dealing with. So in that way, we're starting to get more of those aspects as well.
Yeah. The one I always remember is like Aphrodite Urania versus Aphrodite Pandemos. Also very interesting that Rick went with her dad is Uranus.
Yeah, because she's one of the ones that has a few different or possible origin stories. He did give the PG version of that one, though.
Oh yeah, he just like turned into sea foam.
Yeah.
It made me start wondering because I knew you were gonna talk about this.
Yeah.
When I was reading the scene, is it with Boreas where like
Yeah, when he morphs
like mid scene, it made me wonder if Magnus Chase ran into Zeus, what would happen? While the gods are all in this kind of form where they keep glitching, like if Magnus Chase popped up, would that also cause them to glitch? And like Chiron's not assuming there are other like Norse gods and everything.
Yeah.
So Piper's finally claimed later that night. So
yeah,
do we want to unpack Piper?
Let's talk about Piper.
I feel like there's a lot to unpack about Piper. Because I always liked her. I still like Piper. But she kind of falls into what is the trope called?
Not like other girls.
It's not like other girls, but it's also like you take the glasses off, like you put a makeup on, like you pull her hair down. That it's like that kind of trope. It's like she was beautiful the whole time. But yeah, it's also very much not like other girls too at the same time.
I do think he skirts the line a little bit. Like I don't think he goes fully into that. And you know what it is also, I think it's because it felt like more realistic to me as like a thing a teenager would think, where you're just like, I'm gonna make not liking makeup my whole personality in contrast to my peers. Like that's more acceptable when you're like 15.
That was a mood. That was me.
Yeah. Like, so I'll allow it, you know? Like she learns.
I do think without it, we wouldn't have gotten the great character development that Piper does go through at the very end of these books. But it is like the main reason that I think a lot of people found her annoying when these books came out.
And yet I was just like, oh, I relate to this so much.
Of all of the characters in like any of these series, Piper is the one that I relate to probably more than anyone. I love Piper.
I love her. But yeah, it's just like, oh, I don't want to wear the makeup. I don't want this. So she's gotta reject that she's an Aphrodite kid. And like during this read through of The Last Hero, I was just like, you know, what if Piper wasn't a daughter of Aphrodite though? This was my thing. Like in later stuff, we learned that it doesn't matter the gender of the mortal parrot. So, what if she was a daughter of like Hermes or something? That's the one clue, is that she stole a BMW.
Mm-hmm. I would have killed to see like a child of Hermes on this quest post Luke, in this post Luke world.
Yeah.
And okay, I feel like Charmspeak still kind of works as a Hermes power.
Absolutely.
He's the trickster. He's like this silver-tongued trickster. Come on.
I actually had a few thoughts over the course of this book, like of how many different kinds of demigods' powers could do the same functions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like skipping ahead a little bit, like in the Midas house, for example, I kept thinking about the Diary of Luke Castellan, where like they're both breaking into a mansion. Leo's doing it because he can sense mechanics versus like Luke was doing it because he can pick locks, and like how all of this like little overlaps that happen. Also, like Percy and Jason both are really good at navigating places because they both at different points are like have this innate sense of like winds and like, you know, like nature stuff.
Another thing that would even make sense for Piper would be Apollo, because like she's a bard. The whole thing about her name, like you could sing the snake song. Like I'm just saying, there's so much you could have done here. But yes, Justice for the Aphrodite cabin was actually kind of important after what happened with the last series.
Yeah. I do think in this way, this is how to me in the series, it feels like she's really carrying on Selena's legacy, which is like, I feel like he started undoing a lot of the Aphrodite stereotypes with Selena. And I feel like this is the series where he actually sat down. I mean, well, I mentioned this to Phoebe before, though, where he like sat down and was like, hey, it doesn't make sense that like only Percy has cool powers. But then Phoebe said, yeah, it does, so...
Well, it does because the kids who had the, like, really intense powers in the first... This is completely changing topics.
I know.
But the kids who had the really intense powers in the first series were the big three kids. Like, no one else really had, like, really dramatic powers, and so you could feel just how powerful the big three kids were, and that was like so essential for that series, was to like, especially like that fight between Thalia and Percy in the Titan's Curse. It was like you could feel just how different they were from everyone else around them. And it's like,
yeah,
when you start introducing all of these characters who all have like that level of ability, and they're all like chosen ones, where it's like Leo is the only one with fire, and like, oh, only a couple of Aphrodite kids are born with charm speak,
and Jason can fly.
And Jason's Jason.
But it like kind of, I don't think it weakens what happens in the first series, but it makes it so much less impressive, the things that they can do.
I just had another, like, parental swap idea. I'm sorry I'm, like, on this tangent, but my brain's just, like, instead of, like, oh, Jason's, like, a son of Jupiter, and we have this whole thing with, like, him and being Thalia's brother, which, like, is barely important after this book. What if he was the son of Venus? And, like, we connect him back to this whole, like, Aeneas being, like, the founder of... I know we hate it, but also, like, him being the founder of Rome, like, the first Roman demigod.
It would
like,
make him very Roman. This is true.
I would love that.
Exactly.
This
That'd
would be
be
great.
Make the leader of the quest the child of love, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, now we gotta think of one for Leo. As we keep going, we gotta think of Leo's.
Yeah, we just gotta swap everybody's parents. I think the problem here is that Leo is so aggressively a Hephaestus kid
Yeah.
that it just, like, makes so much sense.
Okay.
Let's talk about the North Wind, probably.
Yeah.
Let's get out of Camp Half-Blood.
We need
Yeah.
to get out of here.
Yeah.
So we meet the, we got more stuff that's, like, Jason related, because we meet the Boreads.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Calais and Zethys? Yes?
Sounds right.
They're winged dudes. They were with Jason, the original Jason. Do we like their modernization?
Yeah, I thought that was funny that they... again, this is when I started thinking about, like, the replaying of the myths and how it's different in this, because we get a lot more of, like they just meet people, but they don't, like, replay deeds. They're just, like, going around, and these, like, mythic figures are just, like, living their lives. And they're just like, okay, you've trespassed onto my home. And, like, I feel like it's also... a lot of them, you get the feeling, are, like, caught up in, like, a greater plot. Actually, all of them, I think, are caught up in, like, a greater plot, which is different from the first series for a lot of it. Because in the first series, they're just kind of chilling, and they're like, oh, that's Medusa. This is, like, just where she set up shop, literally.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are caught up in the impacts of the war from the last book, which I really enjoyed, that we were kind of dealing with the fallout of war. Like, it wasn't just everything's okay now. It was like, no, there are both these kind of gods and monsters who were both impacted by the war, who are trying now to recover from it. You know, setting up already the reasons that they might turn to Gaia. And then there's a lot of talk throughout the whole book of the fact that Zeus has now closed off Olympus because he thinks that the gods are getting too involved. All these hints that Zeus is basically throwing a tantrum because he's been told to claim his children.
He's been embarrassed by, like, everything that happened in the last series. Like, they needed demigods so much, and now the demigods are like, hey, can you, like, pay child support? Please.
And, like, he acts like that is what's causing all of their enemies now, the fact that he was embarrassed like that.
Which is, like, also interesting because they know they're repeating a story. Like, it's happening again the exact same way it happened before, and it's clearly, like, not the fault of demigods.
But he's gonna blame them anyway.
Yeah, but, you know.
I feel like with this scene, and then it'll continue throughout the rest of the book, we start to feel the way that, like, nothing has totally resolved itself. Because there are, like, these people like Boreas, and then we'll learn later, like, the Cyclops, they have their own reasons for joining Gaia because of the impact of... And I think also Midas, that's the reason that he's helping them. There's this clear feeling that sort of settles throughout the book that, like, maybe everything isn't all right after what Percy did. Which is, like, a contrast considering the end of The Last Olympian was so, like, we've fixed it.
You know, there's always fallout after these things, you know? There's always going to be something.
There was something else in my head, but I think I've lost it.
Festus turned into a suitcase. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, let's deep dive into that.
I think Festus is really, you know, a metaphor for how Leo, and that scene in particular is really a metaphor for how Leo just compartmentalizes his life.
No!
You know what? You're not wrong.
And he just carries this, like, he carries this with him, and it's much heavier than it seems. And it's really just,
He has a lot of baggage, okay?
It's true, he does have a lot of baggage. Although, Leo, one thing I thought was, it's one of the things that I think annoyed me about him as a person reading it, but that interests me as a kid.
Okay.
He's so, like, the more and more, like, the series, like, the book progresses, he gets so much more attached to Festus as, like, this thing. He's, like, he feels, like, not only responsible for Festus, like, as a person, but, like, also, like, as a thing he's created. And he really ties his self-worth to Festus in a way that surprises me, because I feel like I don't really see the lead up to that while we're at camp. It seems like it's more and more like while they're on the quest that he really starts to do that. And like even when he voices this to like Piper and Jason, they're like, dude, we don't care, you built it and that's really cool and you fixed it, but like we do not associate this dragon with you aside from that it's a cool thing you made and that you are like super great with it. It's something that interested me about Leo in particular, like this fixation with Festus.
To me it seems almost like he gets worse for a lot of the book.
Yeah.
not like gets worse, like gets more annoying or anything. I mean, like he goes from like kind of feeling confident in his relationship with Piper and Jason, and like at this point he's starting to feel like a third wheel, but like they're only a month into their relationship in his mind, and so he's not totally like fallen into that like, oh, I'm all alone in this, but over the course of this book starts to feel like he's all alone in this. And so it's just kind of him getting worse for a lot of the book.
I guess Leo also kind of gets like bad and like his insecurities along this quest, because it's like, come on, people are counting on him for like the first time ever, really. Like he's always been on his own, and now he's like in a group, he's on a quest, he has to save the world and all this. And his dragon keeps breaking.
Yeah. And he also puts his all into the dragon because he associates his actual powers with such a negative experience that like that can't be the thing that he puts all of himself into. It has to be this like external thing.
Yeah. He's like, my powers caused me trauma, and also like people think that they're evil. So this dragon is my worth on this quest. Nothing else matters.
And then when he loses it, it's like Jason still has, what makes him special. Piper still has what makes her special. And then it becomes like, well, what am I here for?
He's got the breath mints.
That's true. He should really just think about that. And like he'll use, I was kind of surprised at how willing he was to use his powers throughout the book once he like used them again for the first time. But he still isn't going to associate any of his self-worth with his powers. Is the Cyclops scene after this?
Yeah, that's part of this section.
I did like seeing the Cyclops in action in that kind of like, because we only really got to see that sort of scary, like where they're speaking in the voice of the people that you know and love through the story about Thalia, Luke, and Annabeth.
It did remind me a lot about Annabeth's story, actually, because again, Leo would be the like baby Annabeth in the situation where like the two strong fighters are both strung up and incapacitated, and then he's hearing them calling and he kind of has to be the one to save the day.
And, that means that Jason basically relived something that Thalia lived.
Yeah.
And then in our rewritten version...
In our AU!
both times it's a child of Hermes, because Piper and Luke. I just think that, again, the Piper-Hermes thing would be so interesting, especially with this whole, like, betrayal storyline that's happening in this book. Betrayed by a friend.
Yeah. So maybe I was thinking this whole time that Piper was the Percy parallel for this book, but maybe she's the Luke.
Okay, they're all the Percy.
Yeah, but for me it was like, starting it off with like getting into fights at school, and like she literally says the like, oh, I've been kicked out of 5 schools in 5 years instead of 6 schools in 6 years, and like gets her tour done by Annabeth, who teaches her everything and like says lines that are literally just taken out of The Lightning Thief at times. And the quest for her parent, like it felt very, and even certain aspects of her personality just reminded me of Percy.
I think Piper for me also feels a lot like similar to Percy in like her journey in this book, because I feel like in the Lightning Thief, there's always this like fear of like in Percy's brain of like becoming like Thalia, like falling to the same fate as Thalia. And I feel like with Piper, she has it a bit with Selena at the beginning.
Yeah. A lot of what she's struggling with in this book feels like things that Percy's been struggling with. You know, voices saying, "Come to me." Yeah. Percy doesn't even need the charm speak to talk people into things. But
he's just got that raw charisma.
Yeah. Something that I noted that like came later, but I'm going to say it now. I noticed specifically during the Aeolus scene that Leo and Jason's first impulse, like when a god or a monster like says something kind of absurd, isn't to play along. The reason I thought of it in that scene is because no one plays along with Aeolus when he says like, "Oh, you guys are here to promote me." Percy would have 100% been like, "Yes, I am," and like played along with it to get out of that situation. But everyone is like, "No, we're not." And I was like, "What are you guys doing? Obviously, the way out of this is to play into it," because I've been reading Percy Jackson. But in the rest of the scenes, that is kind of something that Piper will do. Well, she will play along with what people assume, or like, you know, she'll do that kind of Percy impulse when Jason and Leo don't actually do that most of the time. Especially Jason. But, like, Jason doesn't do much of anything that Percy does most of the time.
Jason is just, like, competent.
He's like, "I don't need to trick you. I can kill you very easily."
That's why I like Jason. I like characters who are competent. Like, it's really fun to watch Percy do things, but oh man, that boy just throws himself into any situation without thinking it through.
Right. I love it though.
It's like fun to watch him like have to piece the puzzle together while he's like mid-fight.
Yeah.
But like with Jason, it's like he knows what he's doing. He may not know that he knows what he's doing.
When he's had his entire memory and entire core being deleted, he's still like, "I got this."
Yeah.
But like when he does got it versus like Percy's like, "I got this," and Annabeth's like, "You absolutely do not got this," and Percy's like, "Too late, I'm committed." I did have one note. Piper says that she doesn't know a lot about like the myths and the stories about the wars and the giants, and she says those myths are really garbled and conflicted, like people don't want us to know. This segues a little bit into Medea, actually, because one of the things that is really interesting about the fight against the giants, which is called the Gigantomachie, if you want the fancy Greek term, is one of the like places we see it all the time is on the like lintel blocks of a lot of Greek temples. There'll be these friezes that depict like different stories. The Gigantomachie was depicted on one of them in the Temple of Delphi. And a lot of these friezes and a lot of these temples were often built to commemorate specific battles as like a celebration. Like the Parthenon was built, or the original Parthenon was built to celebrate the victory against the Persians. For that reason, the frieze against the Amazons and a lot of these like different artistic depictions of Greek warriors fighting mythological beings tend to be about them fighting foreign powers in a way that it's a bit dehumanizing, to be honest. Like, it's not great. But it's really interesting to me because a lot of the characters that we meet and the mythological figures that we meet in this book are all from, like, foreign lands or outside Greece. And Medea is a primo example of ancient Greek mythology using foreign sorceress women to kind of as an expression of xenophobia. She's also, for the record, my favorite character in Greek mythology. I love her so much.
She's my phone case. So yeah, overly sarcastic productions, little art on my phone case. I love her so much. So I'm mad about Rick's depiction of her.
Okay, I'm curious what. Okay,
listen. I know she's a villain. I know she murdered people, but Jason was worse. He was a man. I support women's wrongs. Okay. Also, she was like being fucked around by the gods. I'm sorry, I just don't blame her.
No.
Yeah.
For half the shit that she does.
No.
I kind of enjoyed the way that she was written in this scene, specifically for that reason, because we get such a cool conversation between her and Piper where Medea keeps explaining why the myth is wrong and that the stories about her are wrong, and like you have to sit there and be like, who do I trust here? Because it's like, obviously I'm supposed to trust Piper because she's one of my heroes, but like Piper just knows the stories, And Medea is like our first-hand on-the-ground source who's defending her side of the story.
I believe her.
And I believe her. Everything she says, I'm like, you're right. You're right about this. But like the reason that I especially was like, I believe Medea is that it's not the only time in this book where we're like talking about rewritten myths. Because right after this, we get Midas, who's talking about how, like, oh, the stories about me are wrong. Actually, I'm, like, way more evil than you thought I was.
Yeah, I mean, I love Medea in all forms. She's such an interesting character in Greek mythology because she is very much written to, like, embody female rage. And she's very much written also to be this, like, existential threat of like Greece was very misogynistic. It's very like existential threat of like, oh my god, this is the nightmare woman. She's evil for no reason whatsoever. And yet, even in the story, like she has so many reasons to be angry. I love that like their idea of like the scariest possible monster is this like woman who just has this chariot of dragons and goes around tricking people because she takes advantage of them underestimating her. Like I love that for her.
To Charlie's point, though, I do think it's a little bit weird that we go through, like, the whole first series, specifically in, like, the Titan's Curse, where we start being like, oh, all of these mortals who were deceived or abandoned by the heroes. And then we get to Medea and we're like, forget we said that.
The thing is, like, she was abandoned, but I feel like Medea is one of the few characters that, like, her story is not her abandonment. Her story is what happened after. Because she actually had to have agency and, like, enact revenge and, like, actually fight back.
I was just trying to find something. Because there was, like, something in, like, what she was saying. I can't find the line. It's like, you want to believe her, but then Piper's just like, no, she, like, is literally charm speaking right now. Like, there's the power in her words is, like, she's lying. And she's trying to bend the story to, like, what she thinks it is. At least that's how I read it.
Listen, she could be charm speaking me, but I believe her.
I want to side with this woman, and Piper and Medea are kind of foils for each other. I mean, the charm speak of it all, and also the fact that Piper's with Jason.
And Medea even, like, tells us the story, right? She was charmed by a goddess into falling in love with Jason, which incidentally, to your point,
Piper also kind of was.
Yeah. And then she went out of her way to help him at great personal cost, which she does.
Yeah.
Her dad. Yeah. And she kind of betrays her dad to get him the golden fleece on the condition that he kind of take her with him. They sort of leave Colchis in ruins, and yet it's also, like, only the beginning of the story.
I mean, you know, her dad's kind of in ruins near the end of this book. But she, you know, she fixes that with a potion, which, you know, Medea's kind of famous for.
If Jason were a slightly, well, more than slightly worse person, because he's a good guy, but if Jason were a worse person, that is kind of how that would have played out with, like, betraying your father to run away with some guy named Jason. And then leaving the world kind of in pieces because you know, went through with...
If Jason were, like, a classic Greek hero, which he's not, because he's Roman, he'd be a piece of shit.
Yeah, I will say, I think that was something else that really struck me is, like, one of the things about the Aeneid, which is why it's not good, is that Aeneas is just, like, way too honorable, but, like, to a degree that it's annoying. Because he's really, like, this, the embodiment of, like, all of these Roman ideals. But, like, it's interesting to me because, again, like, Odysseus, like, a huge piece of his character is that he's just kind of terrible. Like, he's just ever shifting and, like, oh, this little trickster man. And, like, that's what makes it fun.
You're just lending more to my Jason should be a son of Venus, like Aeneas, like that whole, come on.
Well, this is what I mean, sort of, when I was saying that Jason kind of is Rome. It's another one of those, like, we've come from a series that's worked so hard to, like, break down this, like, Percy is not any of the Greek heroes. We don't want Percy to be any of the Greek heroes. We hate all the Greek heroes. And then we get to this next series, and it's like, Jason is a Roman hero. He's got all the values. He's a much more, like, classic hero in that way. And also just in, like, a classic, like, Western way, like we were saying, Superman.
Yeah.
He's a paragon hero, like full on.
It's strange going from Percy, who we've spent like such a long time trying to break down how he's not like those heroes. Like we want to break away from that, and then going to Jason and being like, here is your new main character.
Yeah, I do like also that you brought up like the comparison of like Medea telling her story and she's like comes off much better versus Midas telling his story and he comes up much worse. I feel like comparing these two encounters is actually something we should do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in both of them, it's like, you know, in the Medea scene, we get Jason and Leo completely under Medea's spell so that Piper has to like figure out a way to get out of it. And then in the Midas scene, it's Piper and Leo, I think, both get turned to gold, and then Jason is left to try and figure it out. One thing about this scene that I did enjoy was the way that Jason tricked his way out of it, which wasn't something I was expecting from him. Because the way that he gets out of the encounter with Lit is by telling Midas to help his son up.
He Percy's him a little bit.
He Percy's him a little bit. And then immediately follows it with Jasoning him a lot of bit by summoning a lot of lightning. But like that one moment, you know, it wasn't something I was expecting from him, but it's also like I don't really know him yet at this point.
Oh, the other thing that I thought was fun was that when he goes full Jason, he gets angry and feels a tugging sensation in his gut, and that's when he unleashes lightning power.
Did I miss that?
Yeah. And I was like, the anger of the big three, huh?
This is why I can't listen to audiobooks. I miss the important stuff.
But it was described almost very similarly to the way when Percy harnesses his anger and uses his water powers. And that had me thinking about, like, when Phoebe was talking about the big three and the powers, it made me wonder if, like, maybe that's now the distinction that's being drawn, is, like, that tugging sensation. Because I don't think Leo ever feels that, at least not in this book. And I wonder if it's, like, the anger of the big three that you can harness. And it's, like, it's the anger that makes you powerful rather than, like, the powers. Because he gets mad. Jason doesn't get mad very often.
I also did wonder what these characters' fatal flaws were.
Oh, I haven't considered that yet.
Ooh.
I feel like that's a big topic.
Yeah,
so.
that might be a like later book.
Yeah.
I need to get to know Jason.
Yeah.
I wonder if the power of... I'm going back to what you were saying earlier. I wonder if the power of the big three, if it's just like there's something more ancient or like primordial about it that like makes it feel that way or makes it more intense like that or respond to like those emotions in that way. But like the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, it kind of does that for Leo.
Yeah. And then like if we're talking about eldest gods and stuff, Charlie who mentioned like there's, you know, Venus or Aphrodite in this story is like technically the most ancient.
Imagine if when the Nico book comes out, he describes a tugging in his gut, I would lose my mind.
Anything else you want to talk about in this scene, or
no? I really want to get to this random chapter-long werewolf scene. My favorite thing about this scene is that they keep talking about Thalia and that like Thalia is probably going to show up in this book, and then you have the wolves show up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's Thalia, and then they're like, actually it's werewolves, and then it'll be Thalia.
Yeah, we have to have the evil ones first, and then we're gonna have the nice ones.
But it's like such a short scene, like it's such a short encounter that I was like, why is this here? Like
it's interesting that the hunters, I think now both times they've like appeared out of nowhere in this series where like, oh no, a monster encounter, we can't possibly do anything to help. Immediate savior.
So I feel like now might be a good time to bring up how I think this book is actually the most similar to the Titan's Curse.
Yes.
One, it's like the quest in December for some apparent reason. We have a goddess who's like been taken. I mean, we got the hunters of freaking Artemis here. And then we're also kind of going to the same places, but like we don't quite go to the Bay Area. We go adjacent to it. Jason. To it.
Get out.
Hey.
I mentioned in our Titan's Curse episode, but I feel like we didn't really get into it as much as I wish we had. I do think like Thalia and Bianca have like a lot of parallels. And one of the things I couldn't really talk about in that episode was the fact that also both of them are like parentified figures for their younger brothers.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to me that like those two characters find each other and like have such parallel fates in a way, because I feel like Bianca is sort of the road not taken for Thalia and vice versa. Like they both kind of go on their separate paths. The difference being that Thalia eventually kind of comes back. Like seeing the scene with like Thalia and Jason after all of like the first series has happened was just like really. I kept getting annoyed though, because I was like, why are we not in Jason's head for this scene?
Yeah.
I was gonna say maybe a stupid thing of like why Leo might be there. He's there to, you know, bring Jason some warmth, you know, some comfort.
Yeah.
Well, that's
again
literally
the
why
whole
he's
fire
there.
thing, you know, right?
Yeah.
I do love this one. Well, actually, there are a couple moments that I really like between Jason and Leo in this scene. But when Jason stops Leo from leaving, and Leo realizes Jason was asking for support, he wanted somebody else there, he was scared. And I liked getting that kind of from an outside perspective, just because if you're in the person's perspective, they're going to try and rationalize it, and they're going to try to, like, you know, brush off whatever feeling that they're having. But when you're in an outside perspective, it's just what's on their face.
Okay, I've been thinking so hard about who Leo's like other possible godly parent is. Sorry, I've been thinking about like this whole freaking time since we started this, and I'm just all I can think of is Hestia. That is all my brain is coming up with.
No, that's a good one.
Because another like fire god, and then also like he could be like the glue of like the seven to bring this family together. The one who doesn't have a home is like from the goddess of home and family.
And he makes their home because he builds the ship.
Genius.
I know she's a virgin goddess, but like, come on.
On a complete non sequitur, I have a list of things called Things We Know About Phoebe, the Huntress of Artemis, and we can add another thing to the list, which is she's a healer. She's a great healer.
I was so happy to see her. I forgot that she showed up in this, and when they were like, oh, here's Phoebe, I was like, oh wait, this is the one where she gets like a little scene.
She's in what, 3 books?
Yeah.
And
Maybe?
you know what? She's an unforgettable piece of all of them.
That's the other parallel to the Titan's Curse, is that Phoebe is also there and is the best character in both.
And then Thalia seems to have been working on her fear of heights, because she helps them get like most of the way to Aeolus's.
She could never try flying though. I don't think that would work for her.
I do like really enjoy also like how good Jason is at flying, which like leads me to believe again like he had like his whole other own journey with his powers that we just weren't privy to, where he like became the master of the fucking sky. Like Percy can kind of like do whatever he needs to with water, like rules of the universe be damned.
I want to know what happened with him and that sea monster.
Right? Everyone always focuses on the last part, but no one ever talks about it.
It's the Trojan sea monster, right?
Yeah, what Trojan sea monster? I don't remember a Trojan sea monster. I'm Googling Trojan sea monster. How much do you want to bet the only entries on the Rick Riordan wiki? Top one is Rick Riordan wiki.
Well, you haven't heard of it because Jason killed it so bad that it, like, everyone forgot about it.
But, like, literally, like, we got at least 2 different things that Jason could have, like, done in previous stories. Like, we got his version of The Last Olympian, and then him with this sea monster quest.
That's one of my favorite parts of this book, actually, is just, like, when Aeolus is like, I just saw you! And Jason's like, huh?
What?
What are you talking about? He's like, yeah, I remember you. You were chasing down a sea monster.
And then he stayed at the palace for a couple days?
Yeah. You know why I like it? It's because we never see something like this happen with Percy. Like, we never see him, like, following up, really, with, like, a past encounter. Like, he doesn't, like, go through the same thing twice. And I want to see it. So we've got the Aphrodite dream with Piper. And I think you see her in a very different way than you see her in the first series.
Yeah. I almost want to compare her to, like, the first series, she was Aphrodite Pandemos, and in this one, she's Aphrodite Urania, like, a little bit more. She's a little bit, like, less, oh, these are my ships, and I'm gonna make them canon. And here she's, like, trying to be all motherly. But she's still got a little bit of that, yeah, you and Jason are so perfect together. oh, I'm gonna dress him up in that purple shirt again.
But if it were like original series Aphrodite, you would almost expect her to be talking about like, oh, how tragic it's going to be when he gets his memories back and you like it all falls apart, and Piper would be like, what do you mean? Like that's the kind of scene that would play out in the original series.
It feels like Aphrodite was taking notes and is like, maybe I should be a better mom.
She was like really listening while Percy was giving his speech at the end of The Last Olympian.
I mean, I guess we're also getting it from a different perspective. Like, maybe she talks differently to her kids than to other children of gods.
Yeah.
Who knows?
This is something that I meant to bring up multiple times throughout this episode and then didn't because I forgot. There's more of a focus on the relationships between parents who are actually present, and there's the Cyclops, there's Lit and Midas, there's
the Boreads.
Yes, the Boreads, that's the one I was forgetting the word for. And so we have these like dysfunctional relationships between children and the parents who they actually like live with and who they're stuck with, rather than like, you know, the gods who are kind of, they'll show up once every 2 books.
I do think Piper and her dad have a really interesting relationship in this book, because I feel like at different points we're shown very different relationships that they have, like just within the 2 of them, where like there was a quote I wrote down for when after she rescues her dad, that her dad says something like, I feel like I'm the kid now. Mm-hmm. And she's kind of in that way has to take care of him and is sort of like almost parentified a little bit, like, or at least that's the way it kind of feels when he points it out like that. And yet at the same time we see that like they do have moments in her life where her dad has been like a great parent and like really tried to connect with her in his own way, but there's always still like this, it's like this weird space where like when they do connect it's great, and yet it's such a rare occurrence to her. And like we also get all of these things about how he's kind of pushes her away almost. Like he kind of keeps her there because he thinks it's better for her. There's a lot in this of him like also kind of choosing not to dig deeper, choosing not to think more, choosing to kind of be ignorant to things. The most interesting character moment for me in this book was when Piper was also given the choice of whether or not to give him the memory potion and wipe away his memory of past events. Like, all of the other parents we've met so far are either so completely removed from the Half-Blood life or so completely involved, versus her dad like actively chooses to like not be involved, even though they have this like moment at the end where he's like, I want to remember that you're a hero, and yet I'm too weak to handle it, basically. It's just a really interesting relationship.
Yeah, their relationship is one of my favorite parent-child relationships in any of these books.
It's also interesting that her choice is to give him a potion that wipes his memory, when like a huge struggle throughout this entire book that she's had in her head is like about how terrible it was that Jason's lost his memory. Like I feel like she cares about it more than he does. Because I think it impacts her, and we haven't really talked about it, but like how memory fits into this story. And I feel like we're only getting one part, chapter 1 of a 2-chapter story, if you will, because we have the next book in the series. But something I was thinking about a lot is like how amnesia is like typically used in stories, because it's not real. Like amnesia, the way we see it in Hollywood, like I'm thinking like that Grey's Anatomy arc or, you know, other stuff, like that's not a thing. But it's all over, especially romance. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think about how I've seen it used there versus here. Like the thing that amnesia really has a power to do is to wipe a slate clean when someone's gone down like an irreversible path, like something that would be unforgivable. And it allows them to like take a step back and like get an opportunity to see a little bit of the person that they've become and choose whether or not they want to go back down that path. And often the story is about them choosing the other decision. And thinking about like Thalia and Jason in that light is really interesting to me. The path he went on is really hardcore and has so fundamentally shaped him as a person that like he's almost inseparable from it at this point. Like what does he become from here, you know? Like what is he going to do differently?
all of my thoughts about this are like for later things. Memory is kind of important, I think, in this series in general.
I think what's especially I don't know what it is, but the fact that at the end of this book, Jason hasn't fully recovered his memories. Like, he has that conversation with, I think, Juno in like one of the last chapters where he's like, I still don't remember it all. Like, it's all still fuzzy. And just the way that the memories come back to him as like these short painful headaches that he'll get, and then like, oh, I've found another piece of the puzzle. But they almost, in this book, there are only certain ones that feel like memories. A lot of them just feel like impulses and like things that he suddenly knows, rather than like, oh, I remember this. I think the only one that feels like, oh, I remember this is that he was at the wolf house, like left by his mom, and like he knows that story. But I don't know, even at the end, Jason's memories still feel distant from him. Which all of this I'm saying because we're going to be reading Son of Neptune next.
Did we touch on the fact that like the giants have to be killed by like a demigod and a god working together?
Oh yeah, and his dad is just like, yeah, I'll help you.
And the fact that like Olympus is closed.
Yeah.
They're embarrassed. They don't want help from the demigods.
It's Zeus that helps them here, right?
Yeah.
Or at least Jupiter. Which is like, considering he's the one that closed them down in the first place and is so like, he's the one forcing them all to separate themselves. I am looking forward to the Jupiter Jason conversation because I don't remember it.
Yeah.
Okay. I really want to talk about this scene at the wolf house.
Just the part where he dies. Because I the memory of this started to come back to me, and I was like, wait, does it? Oh my god.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I love about Jason.
You love that he died.
Is that he's a dead man walking, because from our introduction to him, we're immediately told that he is someone who refuses to die, but like keeps getting into situations where he absolutely should have died. Because like in the first or second chapter, Dylan hits him with like a lightning attack and is like, when Jason is still breathing, he's like, that should have killed you. How are you alive? And then when Chiron first sees him, he's like, you should be dead. And like, it's just repeated over and over. And then like, we learn that Thalia believed that he was dead all this time and is like, how are you alive? And it's just repeated so many times. And then Jason finally dies at the end and then wakes up again and is like, I cannot be killed. Like,
fucking immortal.
Yeah.
Maybe this is his secret parallel also, where like he needs to also be kind of equivalent to Percy with the Styx curse. The curse of Achilles.
He's just because like of pure willpower, like will not die.
I mean, that's very Roman to be QH. But like, they're just like both these characters where the monsters are like, I'm trying to kill him. This should be working. Why isn't this working?
Yeah. But I think that, like, it doesn't make him fully invincible in my eyes because we do see him, like, getting knocked out and, like, getting hurt. And so, like, we know he can still be injured. It's not like he has some kind of, like, main character thing where, like, he just can't be killed because he's a main character. It's more that it gives him this aura, like, this kind of heaviness that, like, he's walking around when he shouldn't be. And I feel like he carries that throughout the rest of this series.
Okay, I just had a thought. Like, I mean, Jason's, like, journey as a Roman started here at the Wolf House. And he symbolically, like, and literally dies here as a Roman. And then what does he become after that?
Now I'm kind of going to be thinking, like, how is this a rebirth for Jason? How is he different just moving forward?
Part of it to me is how we don't end the book with him getting all his memories back. I'm linking them in my head also because we just have this scene where Piper's dad chooses to forget. And then, like, we have Jason ending this book kind of also in that place where he's like, he doesn't have it all back. He's like kind of in a way letting go of parts of his past because he's embracing, like, at least like the false memories of like him and Piper's relationship. And further, like, rebirth in this mythology and in this series is like when you get reborn, you are dunked in the lake that you lose your memories.
Jason's been reborn.
Oh, that means that I get to do the same little experiment watching Percy for the rest of the series. I really love this one moment in like the last chapter where they're talking about what happened to Mount Othris. They're just like, obviously it went this way, and Jason's like, you're literally wrong. Like I was there.
I was there.
And I loved that as like a third example of like someone whose story has changed over time, and then they come in and are like, actually it went a totally different way. But for it to be one of our modern day characters correcting their own little myth. But it also, I thought, tied nicely to a conversation that we had last time, 2 times ago. I think it was 2 episodes ago, where we were talking about different regions having different versions of the same story. And I was like, that's what that is.
Yeah,
makes
that's
sense.
true.
He's just so much more mythic than Percy was in some ways.
But I feel like part of that is also because we weren't there with him when he did it. Like, if you
Yeah.
take a step back and think about Percy, it's like, who is this guy? I feel like with Jason, like, we get the benefit of having the step back of, like, we don't know what was going through his... I mean, we imagine he had a bit more of a plan than Percy did, because that's who he is. But, like, if you don't know that Percy's like, I have no idea what's going on in his brain, you see him access God-tier powers. He's, like, invincible. He, like, creates a hurricane. Like, he just...
Right. But with Percy, it's like we were in his head when he did that. So even when they're telling the stories to like Piper or like Leo when they're showing up, it still is like, oh, we know that guy. But with Jason, it's like a total myth to us because we weren't there for it. And so I like having Jason show up just in the same way that these like mythic characters have throughout the book, and being like, actually, my story is different from the one that you've been telling.
Yeah.
Getting a lot of Jason love.
I love Jason so much.
I also love Jason. I don't understand.
People who say he's boring, I'm like, there's so much here.
I have one question for y'all as we end this. Who's the lost hero?
I think it's Percy, actually.
See, I used to say that because I used to like to make everything about Percy, but like so little of this book really feels like it's about Percy that it wouldn't work as a title. I still think that it's Jason.
Because he's lost.
Yeah.
He's lost. Is there a third option that I'm not thinking of?
Gleason Hedge.
Oh, he is lost for a good amount of this. That's true.
That's my final answer.
Hera.
The lost Hera, actually.
Well, etymologically speaking.
Yep.
Exactly.
We have a question for you, which is, if you were to design a bead for this book because it doesn't have one, what would it be?
I fucking knew it was coming, and yet I did not prepare at all.
If it makes you feel better, Charlie, I just remembered that we do that. So
I mean, Festus, he's pretty important. Pretty close to my heart. He deserves to be immortalized as a bead.
And you know what? I had Festus's head as the bead for the bronze dragon. So if you had one bead that was like just the broken head, and then one that's like the full dragon.
No, it's actually just the rest of the dragon.
Oh yeah, not the head, because his head does come off at one point. So.
Yeah, well, it's like a double bead. You know, you
right, you stack them together.
You gotta collect them all. You know, I think I'm gonna give it to like one of Medea's potions, like the forgetting potion. I'm gonna go with that one.
That's a better one than what I would say. Because all I'm coming up with is like Jason's coin, like, which feels like a lame answer to me.
I mean, double-sided coin. There's something there.
Oh, like each side
double-sided
of the
bead.
Yeah, each side of the bead looks different. I'll give it to the coin for Jason.
Our dead boy.
That's actually the bead. It's actually Jason dead.
Jason dead on the ground. Thank you all for listening to Monster Donut. Next time, we'll be reading The Quest for Buford and The Son of Magic. Thank you, Charlie, for being here. Please plug where we can find you and all the other things.
Of course, you can find me on Of the Eldest Gods, many places on the internet. And you can find me specifically, I'm at GreenPixie12, most places. Twitter, it's GreenPixie123. And my drawing Instagram is GreenPixieDraws.
Oh, I don't follow that one. I should do that right now.
I follow you, so...
I'm sorry. And if you want to find the two of us, you can find us at PJOPod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can also email us at monsterdonutpodcast@gmail.com. And these episodes are not on YouTube yet. I'm too busy.
They will be. It's fine. Phoebe has important dramaturgy stuff to do right now.
I'm so busy right now. Once I get past June, I'm going to be like so free.
Much like our heroes, once you get past what you have to do through June.
Once I get past the summer solstice, I'll be free.
That's what they want you to think anyway.
Oh, man. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.